This is a fascinating Ordo Salutis, and I really am intrigued with the thinking of the Gallic monks. Now, part of the challenge is what they wrote was practical theology. That's especially true of Cassian. He did write a work against Nestorius, which would have been a theological treatise, and there are some things we can mine from that regarding his anthropology. But really, we need to mine his practical theology works, the institutes and the conferences, in order to understand what his systematic theology would be. Vincent is another interesting figure. We have three of his works. The Commonitorium, which was this pursuit of identifying orthodoxy, and what's orthodox is that which has been believed everywhere, always, and by all. We have, through the writings of Prosper, that opponent, the Vincentian objections. It's a list of objections that is claimed to be from Vincent. What's so interesting about this is some scholars have been sympathetic to the view that Vincent was an Augustinian. And I've not shared that sympathy. What these scholars have to do is they have to propose that there's a second Vincent out there who wrote those objections. And I don't think we have to do that. I think Vincent covertly attacked Augustinianism in the Commonitorium, and that he does separate himself from later Augustinianism with these objections, the Vincentian objections. The third work was lost to history, discovered in 1938. That's called the Excerpta. It's a collection of Augustine's works. Yes, Vincent compiled a collection of excerpts. It's called a Florilegium of Augustine's views of the Incarnation and the Trinity. What's so interesting about this collection of excerpts is the way that Vincent cut the text, figuratively cut out. He just didn't copy sections, right? He copied excerpts, and he cut off sections in Augustine's Predestination of the Saints. And he excludes all of that stuff that appears to us to be like Calvinism, and he retains the stuff about Christology. I think when you evaluate the Excerpta, you realize, oh wow, Vincent really didn't like, or at least agree with, Augustine on those issues. With Faustus, we have a clearer defender of what we could refer to as 5th century Gallic anthropology. It's the clearest expression because De Gratia is a thorough theological treatise which critiques predestinarianism, what scholars call predestinarianism. Some scholars think this is an extreme form of Augustinianism. I don't think so. I think he's critiquing later Augustinianism. I think that's the better play as a historical analysis. And it's the clearest expression of 5th century Gallic theology because it's a proper theological treatise on these issues. Whereas Vincent was more covert, Faustus is explicit. And you see Faustus's teachings are in alignment with Cassian's practical theology. So you do see this coherent, albeit regional, theology. Yes, it's regional. However, they believed they were in line with the Eastern Greek theological tradition when you study the Church Fathers. Cassian studied in the Greek East. And what he does is he carries over Eastern teaching to the West. This is not a novelty in the sense that it's not an attempt to bridge a gap between Augustinianism and Pelagianism. That doesn't give Cassian enough credit for the theological tradition that he learned. It's not this attempt to bridge the divide between the two, to make both sides happy. That's a terrible way of historically understanding the situation. So any systematic theologian, any systematic theology, any theologian that describes it like that, of which there are plenty on the Reform side and even some on the Arminian side, they are wrong. Read the primary sources. So this is a fascinating Ordo Salutis. It's certainly different from anything we have yet to encounter, although there is some similarity with provisionism. Now, I want to turn my attention over to the comments just to make sure I'm not dropping the ball on any of this. Tallest Apologist asks about resources you'd recommend for the relationship between nature and grace. Well, as I mentioned, you could start with the primary sources. You could read Cassian's Conferences. That's a nice place to start, but recognize that what you're reading is a work of practical theology. It's not a systematic theology. If you wanted to look at it from a historical perspective, one of my favorite books is a collection of essays called Grace for Grace. I've already mentioned it in this video. It's more expensive book, but it's a nice scholarly analysis. If you wanted a scholarly analysis that is a good starting point while fully recognizing some mistakes, Rebecca Hardin Weaver has a work, I think it's by Mercer University Press, Divine Grace and Human Agency is the name of the work. The reason why I say there are some mistakes in there is because she herself admits her mistakes. I'm saying this very neutrally. She realized some 20 to 30 years later that actually her initial research project didn't quite fully consider all that there was to think about on this. And so she wrote the introduction to this work, Grace for Grace. She admits as much. 3 different things that she would change her mind about now. So that'd be the place to start. If I had to critique the Gallic monks, here would be one issue: the priority of individual election. I think in some cases the Gallic monks are still asking the wrong sorts of questions upon the biblical text. There's still this game that they are trying to play about the relationship between divine foreknowledge and election. Also, there remains some unclarity on precisely what is affirmed, even if there is clarity on the denying of the predestination to hell, double predestination. It's fun that it's called double predestination. People don't refer to it as predestination to hell. Eternal damnation. So there's clarity on that. But there's a little unclarity on God's counterfactual knowledge, on whether it's a traditional, what we'd call traditional Arminian model of individual election. So I still think they're asking these wrong sorts of questions. That would be one of the biggest critiques I have of them. I really am intrigued with this model of salvation and the views that they have to offer, because there are so many people. I was unsatisfied with the false dichotomy that you had to be either a Calvinist or an Arminian, and that led me to research semi-Pelagianism. I would read about this definition in systematic theologies, and then I thought, hey, I should read John Cassian. And I started to read Cassian, and I realized, hey, wait a second, this is not what's called semi-Pelagianism, even though Cassian is accused of it by systematic theologians. So that was all during undergrad and my second master's degree. And then I thought, hey, for my doctoral research, I'm going to dig in deep. And so I dug in deep. And I've enjoyed the research that I've had and the writing that I've done, the teaching that I've done on this. And perhaps this Gallic Ordo Salutis, you might find a home here. It's something that describes your impression on biblical teaching about the relationship between grace and freedom of the will. Perhaps that it more accurately describes your view of human nature, that humanity, it's abject humanity because of the fall, but it's not so bad as how Calvinists or Arminians believe it to be, or simply that we shouldn't separate nature and grace. There are some options here that have not traditionally been available to Protestants, and yet there's nothing critical to Protestantism that says we couldn't consider these things as Protestants.